Hello everyone, my name is Alok Mishra and I welcome you once again on my YouTube channel. Today I'm here sitting with Amit and we'll be discussing some very important questions that I think we have missed in one of our previous videos that we uploaded. So in this video, I and my friend, brother Amit will be discussing very basic questions that relate to studying history of English literature. And I will hand it over to Amit, and he has prepared a list of 5 very basic questions that he'll be asking me in addition to all those questions that he might think important in the course of our discussion. So let's get it started.
Hello everyone, my name is Amit and today we are discussing about the importance of studying English literature, and I am Mr. Alok with me. So I want to ask you a simple question. We all know that history of English literature and the students who are beginners, it's a pretty vast subject.
Yes.
And what do you think, what is the importance of a study of English literature for a beginner?
Yeah, Amit, you have asked a very important question and you have raised a very basic, fundamental, and yet I think the most important point. And this is going to build the career building blocks in the life of any student of history of English literature or English literature in general. So when we talk about English literature, the very first thing that strikes the minds of the beginners is that how should they approach history of English literature? Because this is the first thing that they are introduced to when they enter into the classrooms. So history of English literature is not only important, I think this is the essence of graduation studies, because we are to get introduced to the basic tenets, to the basic canons, and to the basic philosophy of English literature. And this can be, I think I should say, this can only be done with the spirit that comes out of the canons or the annals of history. And then we have to discuss why this becomes important. Now suppose you are a graduation student and you have to study John Keats. So to study John Keats, to know more about John Keats, you will have to go to the history, to the pages of history of English literature to understand what movement was there when John Keats started writing and how did he become to be known as a romantic poet. So we'll have naturally to go through the history of the romantic literature, and then we'll come to know Wordsworth, Shelley, Byron, Coleridge, and others. And then we know there was a romantic movement, and then we know that John Keats was one of the youngest poets to be alive in that age, and unfortunately also he died very young. So we can only study poets, dramatists, novelists, essayists, or any other significant figure in history of English literature by getting an idea of the history of English literature itself. So to study a particular piece of literature or to study a particular person in literature, we must have at least the basic idea of history of English literature as a whole. And this will give us an ease, a comfort, and a cushion that we can easily utilize to understand many things.
So that was a pretty good answer. So we all know the fact that every subject has a set of rules and what we can say, of course we can say preambles. But do you think really that history of English literature needs some kind of rules, or what should be the approach? Should we read in chronological order, or we can directly jump to the any age?
That is a very important point, Amit. That is a very important point. And this confusion, I did not only notice in the minds of the students, but also in minds of some of the teachers or professors or tutors or facilitators. So, history of English literature, as I discussed in the previous video, viewers would remember, you would also remember behind the cameras, that history of English literature, when we talk as a timeline, this is a straight line that reaches from here to where. And for a beginner, it is very important to know where this line begins and where this line ends, and in between what are the passages or stoppages or the points that this line stops, falters, or develops significantly or moves steadily. So this line should be studied ideally in a chronicle order, that you know why did a particular movement happen, or why did a particular age become significant, or why did a particular period in the history of English literature could not produce anything significant. So for a beginner, and that is, we all know, a graduation student, a person should study history of English literature in a perfect chronicle order that has been established by the recorders of history and by the critics of history of English literature, or by those who have studied it vehemently in the past to give their opinions, which have become very significant. So in short, if I would like to conclude this, if you are a beginner, then you should approach it chronically. It should be the best for you. If you are a student of post-graduation, then you must have, I guess, and anyone would guess, you must have a basic idea of history of English literature as a whole, and you can pick and choose. You can choose that I have to study this age, I have to study this author, I have to study this movement. So you can pick and choose once you have the basic idea. And for those, suppose who are preparing for competitive examinations like NET, so they have to be very careful with what their approach is in terms of studying history of English literature. They have to pick those ages from which most of the questions are asked. So I think this should suffice all the curiosities that might be in the minds of those who have to study history of English literature on various levels. And this was a very good question. I really appreciate that you asked me this question, Amit.
According to your answer, I can conclude this, that this can be studied in chronicle order for the beginners, and for the master or PhD students, they can choose and pick.
Yeah, it depends on what their requirements are.
So I just want to add a further question in that text. So what should be the approach, like how student MA in English literature, a student approach history of English literature, or how it is different from the beginners who are reading history of English literature?
Yes, Amit, this is a very important question. I think we were just beginning to discuss this thing in the same question that I answered previously. So now your question is that how studying history of English literature as a graduation student is different than someone who is studying in post-graduation. So see, Amit, there is a very clear distinction. In graduation, you are a beginner.
Yes.
You don't have any idea of history of English literature or English literature per se. So you are just beginning to explore things and to know things and to get introduced to things. And 3 years that you spent in your classrooms or reading your books or exploring the internet, so you get an ample idea of history of English literature as a whole. Now this makes you capable, able, and sufficiently intellectual to understand the depths, the course, and the important aspects, perspectives related to history of English literature, which does not demand you to study it thoroughly. So now once that you have an idea of how did the Romantic movement start, how French Revolution influenced it, how did Wordsworth start producing the poems or the literature that he produced, how Coleridge jumped into whole this movement. So once you have all these informations in the beginning, in graduation, now you are capable enough to get into the depths of philosophy of Wordsworth in particular, not the philosophy of Romantic age as a whole. So once we start getting to the depths, once we start exploring the course, once we start exploring the building blocks of history of English literature, then you are getting into a different genre. You are getting into various perspectives, significant dots, and you are capable enough to make out your idea out of those chunks or out of those significant masses, significant blocks in the whole that we know as history of English literature. So in MA, you pursue history of English literature as someone who is having all those basic information intact. So this is significantly different, Amit. When we talk about the difference, this is significantly different. As a graduation student, you just get the basic idea, you just get a wholesome idea. But as a post-graduation student, you have to get to the very depths, to the course and to the building blocks of particular periods in the history of English literature. You also get to study authors, poets, essayists, dramatists, movements, and even the reigns of kings and queens in very particular. So this is significantly different, and I think this question is also very important that many students might have in their minds, and I think I have tried to clarify it. And if you still think that something is left to be clarified, then you can just go to the comment section and add your questions, and I will try to answer you the best that I can.
So, as we are discussing about the approaches to study history of English literature, so what should be the approach for a NET aspirant to study the history of English literature, and how it can be different from the approach of graduation or post-graduate students?
Yes, Amit, this is very important question. I think we must include this when we're talking about approach to study history of English literature at different levels. So, graduation, post-graduation, these two are very academic. These two are not competitive when we talk about competition once you complete post-graduation. Now, when we talk about the NET examination, so this is something which has in these days become objective. So you have to have information in your mind. You don't have to write those elongated answers or make arguments or make those ludicrous circles of information that you can
Logical arguments.
that you can just continue. In NET examination, you have to be precise, you have to be well informed, and you have to put your dot at certain objective options that you have, like this, that, that, or that. So here the approach must be gather information as much as you can. Gather as much information as you can, and to do this you have to be very choosy in what you study in history of English literature. Like, suppose you notice a trend that the questions are coming from a particular age, for example Restoration age, or for example the Romantic age, or the Victorian age, or modern, postmodern and contemporary age, then you have to be very selective in your approach. You have to study all those areas significantly, passionately, and you have to make notes, you have to be informed, you have to pick, this might be an informative thing that I should have in my mind. So here, when we talk about preparing for NET examinations and studying history of English literature in this context, we have to be very selective. We have to pick those areas that are frequently appearing on the question paper. These days not on the question paper but on the screen of your computer where you put your answers, put your inputs. So you have to gather as much information as you can, and I assume, and anybody else would assume, that you have an ample idea of history of English literature as a whole. Then only you can be choosy and selective. So this is something which might be prerequisite when you are going on that stage.
I think you have wonderfully differentiated the approach between how to study English literature at graduation, post-graduation, and NET for NET. So there is a question, and I think we have discussed it earlier, but still it remains fresh, and people want to know that what kind of books, like what are the best book for beginners who are in graduation and who are in post-graduation and who are preparing for NET examination. So what would suggest the best books for history of English literature?
Yes, Amit, you have asked a very important question. Now this question, when we suggest books for graduation students, post-graduation students, or those who are aspirants of NET examination, you raised a very significant point, Amit, and this question is important anytime we discuss history of English literature or how to study history of English literature. Question about choosing the best books is very important, and then we have to have a clear distinction. Someone who is doing graduation and someone who is studying in post-graduation or someone who is preparing for NET examinations, all these students have very different demands. All these students have different mindset and they must have different approach. This is one thing. And to execute that approach, they must be equipped with the right books. So making the right choice in terms of books is very important. And then when we talk about the best books for students of graduation, because they need a wholesome idea of history of English literature and they need an overall view. They need a significant overall view so that their base can be very strong. So for the students who are in graduation, I would suggest 2 or 3 very important books. One is by Robert Huntington Fletcher. This book, minus the modern and postmodern age, is very important, precise, informative, and written in a way that would accommodate the beginners very well, wonderfully. So do remember Robert Huntington Fletcher's book, A History of English Literature. You can easily find it on Amazon or any other bookstores near you. And then the second book that I would suggest and I often suggest is by Edward Albert. History of English Literature by Edward Albert is a very important, precise, a timeline bound book that gives you information the way that beginners would cherish and they will relish studying it. And then one book, if you have studied these 2 books significantly and you have covered all these things that these authors mention, then you can go for David Daiches' book, A Critical History of English Literature. It comes in 2 volumes, the red one and the blue one, I think volume 1 and 2. And this will equip you for your post-graduation, NET examination, or for those debates that we sometimes host on our channel. So this will give you a very significant idea of history of English literature once you study these 3 authors. One is Robert Huntington Fletcher, and one is Edward Albert, and one is David Daiches. Now, coming to those who are studying in post-graduation, it depends how equipped you are. Suppose you are a student who enjoyed a very interactive session during your graduation. You have studied in DU, JNU, or important universities. Then you can go for Legouis and Cazamian's History of English Literature. This will intellectually equip you. This will intellectually propel you. This will intellectually enable you to understand the philosophies, the ideologies, the movements that drive the timeline that we call history of English literature. And then other books are also there that suppose if you want to have an egoistic or if you want to have rather cynical view or rather brutally objective view on history of English literature, then you can go for the book by I. Evans. This is, I think,
short history.
Yeah, a short history, a brief history, but this is a very richly written history of English literature. And then when we come to the NET examination, so here we have to be precise, we have to be accommodative, we have to be contemporary, we have also to be aware from the beginning to the end. And this seems like a very tough task. I have talked to many students and they are like bewildered in the beginning. But once you study all these books in your graduation and post-graduation very well, and you cover all the ground significantly, then I think you should not have any problems. But then, talking about books, we have to be exquisite. We have to be very choosy. And I think one book, which has unfortunately, I think, gone empty in terms of numbers, and this book sells at a very high price. This is published by Hoda Arnold, and I think it has been written by Ian McKeon. This is Literature Post 1914, and I think the same publisher also publishes Literature Pre 1914. So for modern age, this book is very important. And then talking about other books, I think there are books published by Palgrave, there are books published by Cambridge, and there are books published by Oxford and many other publications significantly for NET examinations. And then you can also try any book that you want, any book that you think, because after studying in graduation and post-graduation, you should be capable enough to make your choices very significantly and very importantly. So I think after discussing the books, we have been a little long, but I think we have covered most of the grounds, most of the questions that anyone would have in his or her mind when they start studying history of English literature in graduation, post-graduation, or particularly for NET examinations. So, viewers, I think this was something that was due since we uploaded the last video, because that video just elongated on a particular question that should be defined the strict timelines in history of English literature. And I thank Amit for his accommodation and for his participation in this discussion, which is very important, and I think it will benefit you. So thank you, Amit, and also thank you, viewers, that you stayed with us and watched this video to the end. And we will be coming up with more videos in near future. So till then,
second part of this.
yeah, second part or many other parts of videos like this where we discuss things that would help you in your studies. So till then, thank you and all the best.